to promote the transparency of this fund so that we can all have confidence in its administration. And the context for this, of course, is the fact that I have a bill pending on the floor of the State Senate.
Mr. Chair, I move it. Move the bill.
Thank you. There's a motion and a second. Go ahead.
So AB 112 is pending in the Senate, and that bill proposes a slight increase in the per barrel assessment on imported oil in order to keep the OSPAF from going into deficit in the next fiscal year. In negotiations with the opposition to the bill, I did agree to request a state auditor audit of the OSPAF this year, and that's part of why we're here. Another reason that we're here is that the Oil Spill Technical Advisory Committee recently completed a biennial report, and one of the recommendations was that the OSPAF be audited to ensure that funds have been properly used and are being used for authorized purposes. And then finally, Mr. Chair, you yourself had raised this as something that you would like to see as AB 112 was moving through Water, Parks, and Wildlife. So we're keeping faith with all of those points as we bring this audit request forward. And I think with that, I will just respectfully request your approval.
Thank you, Mr. Huffman. Ms. Hall?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First objective we would accomplish would be determining what state and local entities actually receive funds from the Spill Administration Fund. There are several different entities that benefit and receive funds from this administrative fund, so we would try to identify all of those. Assemblymember Huffman has asked us to look at a 5-year window starting with fiscal year 2006-07 and looking at revenues, expenditures, transfers, and any remaining fund balance for the particular fund to look for trends and to really assess that. And over that same 5-year window, looking at the justification for appropriating or transferring funds from this Spill Administration Fund to these other entities that I talked about a little bit earlier. In addition to that, to determine whether or not the Spill Office has received additional resources and determine whether or not they've done any type of assessment as to what their resource needs are and whether that assessment seems reasonable. In looking at the funds, determining whether or not those funds are being used in compliance with state law and regulations. One issue we did have in the previous audit report where we found staff were charging time to the Spill Administration Fund, but they were not performing duties or responsibilities that would be pertinent to that, what that fund should be paying for. So as part of this objective, looking to determine whether or not they have adequate records of staff time so that the charges to this fund are appropriate and reasonable. Also looking at the organizational relationship of the Spill Office. This is something that we did in the previous audit. The Spill Office is located within the Department of Fish and Game, and really taking a look at its missions, goals, and objectives and how do they align with their relationship with the Department of Fish and Game. We would follow up, although Assemblymember Huffman indicated that we have received responses from Fish and Game and OSPR, as it's referred to, that they have implemented all of the recommendations. Oftentimes that's just based on assertion that the entity has given to us. In some cases we try to follow up to confirm to the extent we can, but I think what this objective would ask us to do is, okay, you've given us the responses, now we'd go back in and test to really confirm that those recommendations have been implemented. And then finally, just looking for any areas of improvement as far as oversight of the Spill Administration Fund. The audit's budgeted just a little bit over 2,000 hours. That's about a 5-month audit.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Howell. Is there any testimony from the affected agency? Wonder where the Director of Fish and Game is. He should be here. It's very troubling to not see him here. Come in. Go ahead. I saw somebody with the uniform. I figured.
Thank you, Chairman and members. My name is Chris Graff. I'm a captain with the Law Enforcement Division of Fish and Game, and I work for the Office of Spill Prevention and Response. I'm currently the acting deputy administrator, and I'll speak to that. We actually look forward to answering any of the questions or recommendations that come from the audit.
Great, thank you. Any questions? Any other testimony from the public?
Tony Francois for the Western States Petroleum Association. We do support the audit. We want to thank Mr. Huffman for presenting it to the committee. We hope the committee will approve it today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Gene Urban, representing JPA Financing Entity. No, that's not true. I apologize.
That's a good one, Gene. That's a good one.
I represent BP. We do not support Mr. Huffman's bill, but we do support this audit request. He has been very faithful throughout, and we faithfully support it too. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from the members? Senator Moffa.
This is a good-looking audit here. I wanted to see if in the scope of it would the actual operations of OSPR and the way it deploys in response to a spill, is there any scope of this audit that would address that, the efficiencies involved of an emergency response and in the most efficient fashion? And
well, Senator, certainly I'll be interested if the state auditor has something to add. I think this is primarily focused on the funding and how the dollars are allocated, how the reporting occurs, but maybe the auditor has something to add.
It will certainly look at funding, but when we follow up on our previous audit report, our previous audit, as Assemblymember Huffman indicated, it was driven by the Costco-Busan situation and how well the spill office responded to that and what they did well and what they didn't do well. I think when we follow up on that previous audit, we will get at what your question is. We will be looking at what modifications or changes or improvements they've made in their ability to respond to a situation, if that unfortunate situation happens in the future, as far as deploying resources in the event there's a spill along California's coast.
certainly, because that's the actual usage of the funds. So I'm interested in how that's been tightened up or looked at. So thank you.
Thank you, and I also want to thank you, Mr. Huffman, for working with me on this issue, and knowing that I thought an audit would be more appropriate. No offense to your bill, but I feel this is such an important issue that we should really look into the management of these fees and so forth. And so I would happily support the audit request. There's a motion and a second. Secretary, please call the roll.
Lara?
Aye.
Lara, aye. Alejo? Aye. Alejo, aye. Donnelly? Huber?
Aye.
Huber, aye. Monning? Norby?
Aye.
Norby, aye. Smythe? Alquist? Anderson?
Aye.
Anderson, aye. De Leon? Dutton? Dutton, aye. LaMalfa? LaMalfa, aye. Rubio? Wolk? Wolk, aye.
This item is out. Thank you, Mr. Huffman. I don't see any other authors here. We'll go ahead and take Mr. Norby's item. Mr. Norby's item is tab E, item 124. Go ahead, Mr. Norby.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This audit request is an examination of an increasing practice by which school boards approve package deals with bond companies, which include payment for political consulting, campaign contributions to pass a bond issue, polling tied to the issuance of that bond business itself once the school bond is passed by the voters. This raises a lot of concerns regarding pay-to-play and whether these bond elections and campaigns are really community dialogues among taxpayers or, in fact, being totally financed by outside interests that have a direct stake in the outcome. This type of quid pro quo would not be allowed if this were done for individuals on a school board receiving campaign contributions in exchange for contract work, but in fact is becoming more common in bond elections. And this raises the cost of issuing those bonds, since those companies are factoring in the campaign costs for passing the bonds in the first place. This asks for an examination of 2 school districts in urban areas, 2 in suburban areas, and 2 in rural areas. And to address this, I have from Government Financial Strategies, Lori Ranieri, and representing the California Association of County Treasurers, Karen Lang.
Before we go there, let's, yeah. Please, Ms. Howe.
Okay. As Assemblymember Norby indicated, we would be visiting 6 different school districts, 2 urban, 2 rural, and 2 suburban, and looking at policies and practices that the school districts use to, first of all, identify the need for a bond sale and the method they use to issue those bonds. As he indicated, he has concerns about the negotiated process and comparing that to perhaps a competitive process that can be used at times. Specific to the negotiated bond sales, he'd like us to evaluate policies and practices used by the school districts when they select who that service provider will be for the bond, the underwriters, bond counsel, other advisors. And then at each school district that have used the negotiated process, select a sample of those negotiated bond sales and conduct a variety of things. First of all, looking at what the costs were to those school districts, what types of fees were charged by the underwriters, bond counsel, financial advisors, etc. And then analyze whether any of these providers actually provided campaign services for the committee that was primarily formed to support the passage of the bond measure in the first place. In addition, comparing some fees to the extent we can, identified in the first step where the fees charged by underwriters, et cetera, again to industry standards or fees charged by other types of entities. So trying to do some comparisons there to the extent we can. In addition, in looking at the competitive process, evaluate any competitive process that's been used by some of the school districts for bond sales methods and determine what the costs were for those school districts when they chose to use that process as opposed to the negotiated. And then finally, in looking at some of the negotiated bond sales and the competitive bond sales, try to the extent we can, again, if we can get an apples-to-apples comparison, try to determine which approach provided perhaps better terms, lower rates, and lower fees to not only the school district but taxpayers. The audit is budgeted at 2,200 hours. It was only a few objectives, but again, he's asked us to look at this at 6 different school districts, so that's why the hours appear a little higher than perhaps you think they might be. A 2,200-hour audit would take us between 5 and 6 months to complete.
Thank you, Ms. Howe. We'll go ahead and move a testimony.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members. I'm Karen Lang. I lobby for the California Association of County Treasurers and Tax Collectors. This has been an ongoing concern for them. They do not have the option of participating in negotiating the structure of bond sales that are done by local school districts, but they do see the final cost, the final terms and conditions of the sale. Their concern is that the fees that are charged oftentimes in negotiated sales are much, much higher than they would have been in a competitive sale, and they do see both kinds of sales, so they know typically what is charged for a negotiated sale, what's charged for a competitive sale. We did provide examples to every member of the committee's staff yesterday showing, for example, in Los Angeles County, the fees were about twice as high as they would have been under a competitive sale. So we're asking for an entity to step in and provide objective comparisons of the negotiated versus the competitive in California so we can come back and make a case in legislation to try and strengthen the law to prevent those kinds of fees from trickling into recovering campaign costs. We view it, the current structure is sort of, there is a non-smoking section and a smoking section, but it's really hard to do that in a restaurant. So we're just looking to really strengthen the law. We think this audit will go a long way. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other testimony?
Good morning. My name is Lori Ranieri. I'm the president of Government Financial Strategies, an independent public finance advisor located here in Sacramento. I'm also a certified independent public finance advisor, and I'm a certified fraud examiner. Our firm works exclusively for public agencies, and our professional activities include advising hundreds of public agencies with respect to financial strategies and include third-party reviews and expert witness work. I am in support of Assemblymember Norby's request for an audit. There's an overwhelming amount of peer-reviewed, published academic research demonstrating the unnecessary cost of the bond issuance practices that would be subject to this audit. Why then do we need this audit? Despite the scientific findings, despite the best practice recommendations of the Government Finance Officers Association, poor and often illegal practices are common. Some of you may be familiar with U.S. Senator Claire McCaskill of Missouri. Prior to serving the U.S. Senate and as governor of Missouri, Senator McCaskill was the Missouri State Auditor. In that role, she audited school bond practices. That audit led to exposure of costly practices and resulted in the publication of 2 important academic studies, which are here, and I would like to share with you. I'm not sure who I hand them to.
Sergeant, well, right behind you.
Thank you. The bottom line of the first study is that on average, a $25 million bond issue with a term of 14 years had excess interest costs of $500,000. The study included 12 variables, bond size, credit rating, bond buyer index, etc., that when combined with the method of sale explain 90% of the variation of interest costs. It would be a reasonable hypothesis, given the larger size and longer terms of school district general obligation bonds in California, we would expect the excess financing costs to be higher than what was identified in Missouri. To give you a rough idea of the magnitude of potential excess cost, according to CDAC in 2010, there were 346 K-12 school financings totaling more than $10 billion.
I'm going to ask you to wrap up, please.
If we simply divide $10 billion by $25 million and multiply by 500,000, we're talking about $200 million in unnecessary financing costs in 1 year alone. It seems reasonable for us here in California to find out what the numbers are.
Thank you. Any other? Go ahead, sir.
Dave Walrath, representing Small School Districts Association. The association does not have a position either in support or in opposition to the audit request. However, we do have a request of the auditor and of the committee. School districts have been faced with significant cuts in funding, reduction in staff, and we hope not a trigger with a new set of mid-year cuts which could occur if state revenues do not occur as anticipated. Our request is that as the auditor does the audit, if the committee so directs, that a school district will have no cost in staff time, no cost in duplicating materials, no other cost for the purposes of the audit. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the committee members? Comments? Senator Wolk?
Yes. Assemblymember Norby and I have had dealings on this issue before. He brought AB 1045 to the committee. The recommendation of the committee actually was to narrow what he was requesting at that time in order to get at narrowly the issue that he wished to. And this was our committee recommendation, that we should require that legislators may also wish to require bond issuers to report more information about their negotiated bond sales and authorize CDAC to report to the legislature comparing the borrowing costs of the local agencies' GO bonds and negotiated GO bond sales with underwriters that provide campaign services. And with more information about costs, legislators can reconsider their earlier decisions. I suggested that Assemblymember Norby accept that amendment, and it would have gotten out of committee, but he chose not to. I think that this is far broader than what I think is necessary, and it's expensive. So again, I'm not going to support your request here in this way. I urge you, put the bill back with that, and it gets out of the Senate, and you get the information you need. Far less money.
Thank you, Senator Wolk. Are there any other comments on this item? Senator LaMalfa.
I was curious as to how you would be defining suburban and rural districts for selection amongst the six.
I think there's specific criteria related to that. I don't know off the top of my head, Senator, but I think there is information that we could get from the Department of Education that would identify rural versus urban versus suburban school districts.
Okay.
I think I'm not sure if it's related to population or attendance or ADA, but I know there is some criteria because we've used it in other audits, but I don't know the answer off the top of my head.
Okay. I would ask, since having a lot of rural, that indeed it is very rural, that a city like Chico doesn't become rural. That could be, suburban in size, in my view or the area view, that if you go for rural, you get very, very small districts, at least one reflected in that. So, okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator LaMalfa. Go ahead, Mr. Norby.
AB 1045 did die in the Senate committee, but it did pass the Assembly committee. It did pass the Assembly floor, and I felt it was important to pursue the fight to get it passed, which would have banned this type of pay-to-play bonding, and did not pass on the Senate floor. I was told, well, make it a study bill, which I wasn't willing to do, but it did die, was killed. I think this is a kind of a study bill. We are going to study the issue and see where the relative costs are. It is an important public policy concern. and it is an important financial concern. I ask for your aye vote.
Thank you, Senator Norby. Senator Norby. I also want to just comment in the spirit, and I appreciate Senator Walk bringing up those comments. I'm not going to support this request today because I think the deference of our Senator Walk here, I want to urge you to consider working with her and her staff to ensure that we, kind of lessen the scope. I think it is a lot of money to be spending during this time on this particular study. Given that I think a bill would be a more appropriate route for this type of issue that we're trying to address here. So, unfortunately, I won't be supporting your request today. And with that, Senator Alquist, go ahead.
I agree also with what Senator Wilk was saying. I appreciate Assemblyman's work in this area, and I really hope that he will work with Senator Wilk, but I will be voting no today.
Go ahead, Mr.
I have my reservations about this request also because Mr. Norby had a bill that came to Assembly Local Government Committee, and even then I had concerns about his bill, didn't support it, and I think this is trying to find another avenue to get at what his goal is, but I just don't think this is a proper way of going about doing it, so I'm not going to support this request today.
Thank you, Mr. Alejo. Is there any other questions? Is there a motion to approve? There's a motion. Is there a second? There's a motion and a second. Secretary, please call the roll.
Laura?
No.
Laura, no. Alejo? Alejo, no. Donnelly? Huber? Monning? No. Monning, no. Norby?
Yes.
Norby, aye. Smythe? Alquist? No. Alquist, no. Anderson? Aye. Anderson, aye. De Leon? Dutton? Lamalfa? Aye. Lamalfa, aye. Rubio? Wolk? No. Wolk, no.
That item is on call. Thank you, Mr. Norby. Next, we're going to have Senator Desaulniers. That is tab J, item 127. Senator, welcome. Feel free to start.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ms. Howell. Appreciate being here. Hope you'll be gentle with me. This is the first time I've been in front of this committee in the 5 years I've been here.
No promises.
Yeah, right. I was just looking at my seatmate.
I'll make the motion.
Senator Walker.
To ease the water. I'll make the motion.
I didn't expect gentleness from Senator Anderson.
There's a motion by Senator Anderson and a second by Mr. Monning. Go ahead.
I appreciate it. I'll try to be brief. There's really, in my view, two parts of this request, and there's also a timeline that is a moving target that I think I want to address, and hopefully the auditor will help me with this. The genesis of this came from, and you have some material, there's a lot of newspaper and a lot of attention in the media to a very intense debate about relocation of regional governance, particularly the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, of which I was proud to be a member for almost 10 years, from Oakland to San Francisco, and you'll have witnesses who will speak to that. But I think there are two parts, really, of this, and the most important part to me is not the building so much, but the proper use of toll funds. The relationship between the Metropolitan Planning Organization, MTC, and the legislature has changed dramatically over the last 10 or 15 years. In my mind, actually starting with a bill that Senator Kopp authored, SB 45, that flipped the funding resources and responsibility. And then toll money going to the regional agency to be the oversight agency has just happened. So I think it's really important that we look thoroughly, both from Ledge Council but also from the auditor, is the appropriate use of those funds. There are significant funds. The 7 toll bridges, state-owned toll bridges in the Bay Area are very busy. The toll funds were meant to be used, at least to the voters of the Bay Area, to seismically retrofit after Loma Prieta those bridges. We're still at work with that. Any of you have seen the eastern span of the Bay Bridge under construction. So when we all of a sudden change that and take $180 million and say we're going to put that into relocating in a building, I think it's appropriate that the legislature take an active role in how is that done, what's the authority, what's the relationship between the state and the regional agency on how they expend these funds, and what did we tell the voters and the toll payers as to how these funds would be expended. And then the second part is the building itself. The MTC, who has a representative here today, has taken an action to reconsider their vote. They have signed a subcommittee to have, within 60 days, report back. So that part of the equation may actually be moot. And I'd like to work with the chair and with the auditor to make sure that if that happens, that we save as much money in terms of the money allocated for the audit as possible and focus on the first part. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions, and I hopefully will have your support.
Thank you, Senator. Ms. Howell, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As Senator DeSaulnier said, one of the things that we'd be asked to do is looking at the assessment of the space needs of the agencies involved, MTC and Bay Area Toll Authority, and to the extent to which the space in the new building meets or exceeds their respective space requirements. Now, what we can do as part of this objective is just look at what types of assessments they have done as far as what their space needs are, regardless of whether this new building is the ultimate decision or whether they decide to stay where they are or they decide another alternative. So we could still conduct that particular audit objective even though they've put some of the decisions on hold, at least for the time being. We would also be inquiring of those two entities, did they consider any other alternatives to acquiring a new office building? What was their thought process, and is there justification for vacating the buildings that they're in and relocating? So looking at the overall process for assessing their needs and then their decision making as far as did they consider other alternatives and what did they do to justify vacating the buildings that they're in if that's the ultimate decision, and then any plans they have for disposing of the existing buildings that they do own in both MTC and the Bay Area Toll Authority, and the Air District is another entity that was included in the request. Identifying the funding sources for purchase of a new building. Determining whether or not it's toll revenues or what the intent is as far as what the funding source will be for a purchase. The Senator has asked us to look at policies and procedures, any internal controls that they have in place to make sure that there's a separation between the two, so they ensure that the decisions that are being made for use of toll revenue is in the best interest of toll payers and really does follow the requirements either in statute or in regulations. The next objective is very specific to what the Senator indicated, is the appropriateness of using toll bridge funds to acquire a building, a headquarters building. First of all, determine whether it's permissible, including those toll revenues from a recent increase back in 2010. And then also determine if there are any prohibitions against the Bay Area Authority, the Bay Area Toll Authority using revenues to acquire a building that is larger than what they need and then ultimately renting the excess space or leasing it to other public entities. So we could do the analysis of the appropriateness of using toll bridge revenues. In addition, looking at cost-benefit analyses. Have they done a cost-benefit analysis related to the acquisition of a new building, and determine if they have done so, whether it's reasonable, appropriate, and did it consider back to the previous objective, did they consider alternatives? Two objectives that we may or may not do based on some decisions that have been made recently are objectives 7 and 8. And basically what 7 is specifically asking us to do is looking at the structure of the transaction. Well, if the transaction doesn't take place, then that objective really essentially becomes moot. And then the other objective is identify whether any of the proposed tenants would take an equity position. Well, if the decision is made that they're not going to acquire the new building, again, that objective would drop off. And then our final objective is kind of a catch-all, where if there's anything that comes to our attention that's significant to the issues requested in the audit, we would look at those as well. Right now, it's currently budgeted about 2,100 hours. If ultimately we don't do those two objectives, the cost of the audit would be reduced. Unlike the previous discussion about a major scope limitation, I wouldn't see this, or modification, I wouldn't see this as a major scope modification because we're dropping off objectives and the audit's costing less. We're not adding or expanding any of the objectives we've been asked to do at this point. So I wanted to make that distinction for the committee. As I said, right now it's 2,100 hours. It would go down if we end up not doing those two objectives.
Thank you. Is there any public testimony on this matter? I'd like to ask folks to come up now. While folks are coming up, I'm also going to lift the calls on certain items. I know some of the senators have to head to their caucus, so Secretary, please lift the call on the items that are pending.
Okay. So 2011-118, Huber. Fewer. Monning. Monning, aye. Smythe. DeLeon. Rubio. Wolk.
I would like to ask a question since I wasn't here, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
The auditor on the fewer. I'm sorry. On the fewer audit, I understand that there was testimony and clarification that there would be some broadening of the types of agencies that would be looked at, the JPAs?
Well, there wouldn't be an expansion of the scope of the audit, but there are specific objectives in the analysis. I think Objective 12 talks about looking at not only those two JPAs that are called out in the audit request, but also looking at the structure of at least 2 or 3 other conduit financing entities and comparing the business models. In addition, there are other objectives. I think one of them is Objective 8, where we're asked to look at the fees charged and comparing that to industry standards. And to do that, we would have to look at fees charged by other conduit financing agencies. And then there's another objective, and I'm not going to be able to recall. It's related to market events and defaults. And again, similar, looking at these two JPAs and the rate and comparing that rate to industry standard, which again would pull in some other conduit financing agencies.
Okay. And my understanding from the treasurer is that there would be some expansion in the scope, which his office would then pay for. So with that, I'm an aye.
Okay. That's fine.
Okay. Wolk. Wolk, aye.
Welcome.
2011-119, Hayashi. Donnelly.
Before we move,
sorry.
that item is still on call, just for the record. Go ahead.
Okay. 2011-119, Hayashi. Donnelly. Norby. Alquist. Alquist, aye. DeLeon. Rubio. Wolk. Wolk, aye.
And I'd like to, if I could change from a not voting to a yes.
Okay. Monning, aye.
Is that item out?
Mm-hmm. No,
No.
Hayashi.
Hayashi.
Okay. 2011-120, Portantino. Alejo. Alejo, no. Donnelly. Monning.
Not voting.
Monning, not voting. DeLeon. Dutton. Rubio. Wolk. Wolk, aye. And that's out.
That item is out. Anything else?
And then the Halderman, we need a motion.
Okay. We are going to briefly entertain a motion for the Senator LaMalfa and Halderman request. Is there a motion on that item? It's moved by Senator Anderson. Is there a second? Seconded by Ms. Huber. Secretary, please call the roll.
Lara.
No.
Lara, no. Alejo. No. Alejo, no. Donnelly. Huber. Norby. I'm sorry. Monning. No. Norby. Smythe. Alquist. No. Alquist, no. Anderson. Aye. Anderson, aye. DeLeon. Dutton. LaMalfa. LaMalfa, aye. Rubio. Wolk. No. Wolk, no. And that's on call. Okay. 2011-123, Donnelly, Monning. It's Huffman's. Huffman, or Monning, aye. Smythe, Alquist. Alquist, aye. DeLeon, and Rubio.
That item is still out.
Did we do Hayashi?
Yes. Corbett is the next one. Go ahead. Quickly, please.
Sorry, excuse me. Donnelly, 2011-124. Donnelly, Smythe, DeLeon, Dutton. Okay, and then we need one for Corbett, and that's still out or on call.
That item is still on call. And we need a motion and a second for Senator Corbett's item. Motion by Senator Walk, second by Senator Alquist. Secretary, please call the roll.
Laura.
Aye.
Laura, I. Alejo. Alejo, I. Donnelly. Huber. Monning. Monning, I. Norby. Smythe. Alquist. Alquist, I. Anderson.
No.
Anderson, no. DeLeon. Dutton. LaMalfa. LaMalfa, no. Rubio. Wolk. Wolk, aye. That's on call.
That measure is on call. We're going to go ahead and that's the last item, right? That's on call.
Is Hayashi out?
Yes.
Hayashi's item is out.
Okay.
Would you like to add on or?
Yes, please.
Go ahead. Let's lift the call on that.
2011-119 Hayashi. Anderson.
Aye.
Anderson, aye.
No problem. Okay. Thank you. I apologize, Senator DeSaulnier. Go ahead.
Mr. Chair, my name is Randy Rentschler. I've had the great privilege to work at the Metropolitan Transportation Commission and at the Bay Area Toll Authority, including with Senator DeSaulnier and in his service there for over
Can
a
you put the mic closer to your mouth, please? I just want to make sure.
Yeah, thank you. I'm sorry. That Senator DeSaulnier is actually looking for an audit has certainly gotten our attention, particularly as the chair of the committee and as a former commissioner. It is our objective at MTC to be as transparent and as understandable in all our decisions as we can. And in this case, when we come up short, we wish to be responsive to the points outlined in this proposed audit. Of the 9 points presented there, these items have been discussed at great length by our commission, by the public. As Senator DeSaulnier has mentioned, it's been discussed in the press at great length. Whether or not this committee seeks to get engaged on this subject or not, it is our objective to answer all of these questions to the satisfaction of Senator DeSaulnier to the best that we can between now and when a final decision is made about the potential building move to a regional body. I'm here to support the senator's request with respect to this information. Whether or not this committee gets engaged or not, I have no view about that at all. But we do commit to the senator to get his questions answered, and I can answer any question this committee has on this potential move.
Thank you. Any other testimony from the public on this issue?
Casey Elliott on behalf of the City of Oakland. We are also in support of the senator's request.
Thank you. Is there any other testimony on this request? Questions from members? There's a motion.
May I?
Oh, Senator LaMalfa has a question. Go ahead, Senator.
Real quick, I just I hope we can really drill down on this, the cost of this building, $180 million, and how much of that building was going to be used for the BATA portion and how much. So I'm highly interested in that. I saw something on TV about the the replacement building at the World Trade Center. I think it said was budgeted at $700 million. So the Freedom Tower. So I mean, we're getting, for 1/4 of the price of that, a building for the bridge services there. So I'm glad you're drilling down on it. So we hope we get complete information on what this building would have been used for, or what we would do to possibly head off something like this in the future. Thank you.
I was afraid you were going to say that you had heard that MTC wanted to build the World Trade or buy the World Trade Center.
Okay, there is a motion by Senator Anderson and a second by Mr. Monning. Secretary, please call the roll.
Laura.
Aye.
Laura, aye. Alejo. Alejo, aye. Donnelly. Huber. Aye. Huber, aye. Monning. Monning, aye. Norby. Smythe. Alquist. Alquist, aye. Anderson. Anderson, aye. DeLeon. Dutton. LaMalfa. LaMalfa, aye. Rubio. Wolk. Wolk, aye. That's out.
That item is out. That wasn't so bad, Senator. Good job.
I make them back every year. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you. Next, we have Assembly Knight, tab M, item 130. Assembly Knight, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. I'm here today to request that JLAC Committee approve an audit of certain procedures related to the California Alternative Rates for Energy Program, or the CARE program, which is administered by the PUC. Specifically, it has come to my attention that there may be serious problems with the PUC's eligibility and verification protocols for CARE enrollees. which may be costing utility ratepayers, our constituents, hundreds of millions of dollars per year in extra surcharges to provide discounts to persons who actually make too much money to qualify for assistance. Members, I want to emphasize at the outset of this audit will not change the current eligibility criteria and will not remove anyone from enrollment. This audit request is designed to ensure that CARE funds are used only to benefit low-income customers and are not misappropriated by high-income subscribers who want to take advantage of the system. CARE was started more than 20 years ago with the best of intentions to provide a 20% discount in the cost of electricity and natural gas to low-income persons. The cost of the CARE program to ratepayers has grown exponentially in the intervening years. For example, the cost of CARE to PG&E's ratepayers grew from $11.1 million in 1990 to $732 million in 2010, representing an increase of nearly 1,400% in just 10 years. In all, the total cost of CARE to California ratepayers in 2010 was a little over $1 billion. In order to facilitate enrollment in CARE, the PUC decided to make enrollment on the honor system. Applicants self-certify by stating that their household income falls below certain thresholds, but they do not state this under penalty of perjury, and there's no requirement to submit proof of income. The PUC has authorized utilities to conduct random post-enrollment verification of CARE enrollees in order to weed out potential fraud. In actual practice, it appears that utilities randomly choose about 1 to 2% of the CARE customers. In 2009, PG&E did one of these samplings and found 58% of those randomly audited were ineligible. In 2009, Southern California Edison did this same audit and found 56% were ineligible. San Diego Gas and Electric did this in 2009 and found 66% were ineligible. Those found to be ineligible are placed back at the regular rate. After 2 years, they are allowed to self-certify their way back into the CARE program without showing proof of income. And thereafter, they have only a 1 to 2% chance per year of being audited again. It costs all of our constituents more than $1 billion per year to pay for this. Given the extraordinarily high number of enrollees who are found to be ineligible year after year in every utility, it seems to me that there is to be a better way. So I'm asking the state auditor to take a look at how the PUC is administering and overseeing this program, to compare it to how similar programs are run in other states, and to see if we could administer this program in a more fair, efficient, and equitable manner, both for persons who are truly low income and who deserve our help, and for all of the other Californians who are required to pay more for their electricity and gas in order to fund CARE. Again, I want to emphasize that this audit will not change the current eligibility criteria, and it will not remove anyone from enrollment. It seeks to ensure that we are running CARE as fairly and as efficiently as possible.
Thank you. State Auditor.
Thank you, Ms. Huber. As Assemblymember Knight indicated, we would be looking at both PUC and these three largest investor-owned utilities. But the first objective is asking us to identify information over a 10-year window. Hopefully PUC has this information readily available for us, and that would be enrollment levels in the CARE program and what those costs associated with those individuals. In addition, the percentage of enrollees found to be ineligible when the utilities have either audited or attempted to verify the eligibility of participants. And then the estimated amount of discounts that those ineligible enrollees have received. Again, to the extent we can get this information from PUC, we will attempt to do so. In addition, we'll conduct some audit work at the PUC, looking at their policies, their guidelines, and their controls related to eligibility and enrollment in the CARE program, looking for specific things. First of all, when we look at the policies and guidelines, do they have controls that will effectively prevent individuals from enrolling who are not eligible for the program? And then what does PUC do to ensure that utilities are targeting their audits? If they're doing certain audits, are they targeting households that are receiving the largest discounts? And then also determine whether PUC is effectively overseeing the utilities' implementation of the CARE program. And then finally at PUC, determine whether PUC has performed any type of cost-benefit analysis in determining whether or not to encourage utilities to seek repayment from individuals or enrollees who were found not eligible for the particular program. Has there been a cost-benefit analysis done to determine whether to seek repayment or not? Now, at the three largest investor-owned utilities, again, as Assemblymember Knight indicated, that would be SoCal Edison, PG&E, and San Diego Gas and Electric. It would be similar types of work. It would be looking at their policies and procedures for determining eligibility for enrolling individuals in the CARE program, and then also looking at their verification process or their audit process. How do they determine and enforce the policies and guidelines of the CARE program? Do they conduct any type of cost-benefit analysis to determine whether they should seek repayment from individuals they've deemed ineligible for the program? And what are their practices for seeking that repayment? In addition, as Assemblymember Knight indicated, he's asked us to look at other utilities, including utilities in other states, to the extent we can, conduct a survey to try to identify similar programs and what policies and procedures these other utilities use for a comparable type of program, and then look at the policies and procedures that other states use, other utilities use, to determine whether or not there are more effective oversight, enrollment, certification processes that the state could learn from, and then evaluate those procedures, particularly relative to recovering funds spent to provide benefits, again, to individuals who were deemed ineligible for the program. And then, again, finally, looking for best practices. If there are practices out there that are being utilized by utilities in other states, let's learn from those and perhaps embrace those and use them in California. And then the final objective is looking at expenditures that the utilities have used for outreach efforts to inform households about the CARE program and whether or not those utilities are actually using third-party contractors to perform the function, and making sure that these third-party contractors are not enrolling ineligible households. So what kind of processes is PUC looking at when there is a third-party contractor involved to make sure that they're not enrolling ineligible households? The audit is budgeted at $22.92. Again, that's take us around 6 months to complete the audit.
Thank you, Senator. Are there any comments from the affected agencies or utilities?
Good morning, members. Edward Randolph with the California Public Utilities Commission. Most, if not all, of the issues that the Assembly member has brought up in his audit request are issues that we're aware of, both from the audits from the utilities and some of our own internal audits, and are issues we're already trying to address at the Commission. We have an open low-income proceeding that the utilities have made some proposed changes themselves to the programs to deal with some of these issues, and on the staff level, staff will be making some recommendations in the next few months. We anticipate that proceeding being finished in spring of 2002 with a proposed and final decision and possible rule changes. That said, we don't find that the scope of the audit undermines our proceeding at all, and there is some possibility that the audit would come up with some additional positive recommendations that could shape rules in the future.
Thank you. Any other comment from the public on this issue? Questions from the members? Mr. Alejo.
Mr. Chairman, I'm just wondering whether you're going through a process to address some of the concerns that have arisen, that you're coming back in spring 2012, that perhaps maybe a better time is to allow to see what recommendations and policy changes come out of that, rather than having to proceed with an audit at this time. I think we should let that play itself out, and maybe we could look at it in the spring again, whether this audit is necessary.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Alejo. Great point. Are there any other comments on this issue? Senator Anderson?
Well, I'm a little confused. The witness, what was the statement you made just prior to this? You said you thought there might be additional information from the audit that would be helpful to that or not helpful to that?
You know, the scope of the audit, as I understand it from the auditor and from the letter, would include some recommendations looking at best practices at other states, looking at you know, our own internal practices. I'm not here today to say that what we're doing is perfect today. I'm sure there's improvement for us, and you know, recommendations that do come from any source, including the auditor, would be embraced on ways to improve the program.
Thank you. You know, I also too share the same concerns that Mr. Alejo does. I think the work's being done on this issue. I look forward to seeing the recommendations that come out of the PUC with this on this issue. Also, you know, the thing I'm wrestling with is, given that, you know, CARE is administered by a private investor-owned utilities, it's not clear for me if, you know, we even have the jurisdiction to do this, conduct this audit. And so I'm gonna request that we not support this item at this time and wait until the PUC comes up with the recommendations and see if we have to do further work on this item. So that's my recommendation, and I would entertain a motion on this issue, on this request.
I'll move it.
So moved by Senator Smythe. Is there a second? Second by Senator LaMalfa. Secretary, please call the roll.
Lara?
No.
Lara, no. Alejo? No. Alejo, no. Donnelly? Huber?
No.
Huber, no. Monning? No. Monning, no. Norby? Smythe? Aye. Smythe, aye. Alquist? No. Alquist, no. Anderson? Aye. Anderson, aye. De Leon? Dutton? LaMalfa? Aye. LaMalfa, aye. Rubio? Wolk? No. Wolk, no. That's on call.
That item's on call. We are going to move to our next request. We're giving Assembler Ma 2 seconds to get here from her office. No offense to our former chair, Ms. Huber. Go ahead. Perfect.
Shoot.
Members, Ms. Huber's request is tab L, item 129. Go ahead, Ms. Huber.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In the interest of time, I'll try to be quick. I do know how to do these pretty quickly. It's not very often we get the chance to do something like a pilot program and then look back to see how successful our efforts have been or how unsuccessful they've been before we go and take it large scale. This audit presents us with that opportunity. I'd like to request that the Joint Legislative Audit Committee to review and make recommendations on the Youthful Offender Block Grant Program that was established under the provisions of SB 81. In 2007, the legislature approved and the governor signed the Juvenile Justice Realignment Law, which realigned programs for juveniles, nonviolent, non-serious offenders, and the Correctional Standards Authorities required to collect data now on the use of those block grant funds to the counties under SB 81. However, CSEA's reports only provide aggregate data, so we're unable to determine how the programs are working on specific locations. Also, there's no requirement for the use of evidence-based programming, making it difficult to determine if programs are actually working. Nearly 5 years has elapsed, and now California is about to embark on returning a similar population of adult offenders back to the counties under legislation that became law this session. There has also been proposals this year to realign all juveniles back to the counties or to convict them as adults and remand them to adult prisons. While these have been rejected at the moment, they may be considered later. So before we take additional steps in that area, it's time to look back over the last 5 years, examine how the current realignment of juvenile programs is working, what are the outcomes, and is the funding that we're currently giving to the counties of $117,000 per ward adequate to provide the services that they need. So this audit's necessary to determine the success of the current realignment policies prior to the consideration and possible enactment of additional correctional realignment policies. So I respectfully approve the audit.
Thank you, Ms. Huber. Ms. Howell?
Thank you, Mr.
Quickly.
Chair.
There was a motion.
There's a motion by Mr. Alejo. There's a second by Mr. Smythe.
Is it safe?
It-
Okay.
It's all yours.
Okay. As Assemblymember Huber indicated, one of the first objectives we would complete would be to look, beginning with fiscal year 2007-2008, looking at the amount of block grant funding that counties have received and expended, and then determine if there are any unexpended block grant funds. But then there's a couple of objectives very specific. As she indicated, SB 81 was enacted back in 2007, and what she's asked us to do is look at, for each year since the passage of SB 81, determine the juvenile population in both juvenile justice as well as the number of juveniles within the adult prison population. So look at that 4-year window, or 4 years. Look at the trends and the number of juveniles that have been tried as adults and sent to prison for each year subsequent to the passage of SB 81, again, looking to see if there are trends. And then to the extent we can get our hands on data, and there's data available, we would determine how many juveniles in juvenile justice were transferred from the state to local control subsequent to SB 81. Then, as she indicated in her opening remarks, we would need to get out to a sample of counties and be able to get specific information related to those counties. And that information would be, are the counties actually accurately accounting for their block grant allocations and their expenditures? And what types of services are they providing with those block grant funds? And what access to those services, are they similar to what had been provided under juvenile justice? Whether counties are having to supplement their block grant funds with other funding sources, again, to provide services to juvenile offenders. And then at the county level, similar to what we're going to try to do at a more global level, is look at the rate of admissions to juvenile justice and to adult prison facilities for each year subsequent to the passage of SB 81. So not only do it earlier, as we tried, as I indicated, at a state level, but for those individual counties that we visit, try to get that same information with respect to that particular county. And then look to determine whether the counties are actually complying with block grant requirements, including those related to an annual application process and reporting of expenditures, reporting of performance outcomes. What are we accomplishing with the grant funds that are being expended? Another objective is to determine, again, this is transparency, determine the extent to which the block grant information, including performance outcomes, financial data, is made available to the public, so the public knows how much money is being spent and what type of outcomes are we accomplishing by the use of those funds. Looking both at the state level and the county level, the amount of oversight and monitoring of the block grant funds that is occurring. And then another objective is looking at enforcement actions. There's a correction standards authority. What enforcement actions do they have the authority to take against counties that are not meeting the grant requirements, and if determine whether or not that Correction Standards Authority has ever taken any enforcement action against a county that may not be complying with the block grant requirements. Another objective, looking at performance standards used, outcomes reported. Are those methods that they're using reasonable to develop the standards in the first place? So we've developed standards. Let's look at the process for how we got there. Are those the appropriate standards for which we're going to measure performance? And looking at specifically the Correction Standards Authority and how they measure county success. And then the final two objectives is, again, looking at data that this Correction Standards Authority has collected, determine which counties have most significantly decreased or increased the rate of admission of juvenile justice individuals to adult prison facilities, again, since the passage of SB 81. So using information that this Standards Authority has. And then finally, determining what happens if a program is not successful, what happens to the block grant funding, both for those that are performing very well and those who perhaps are not performing as well. Is there any ramifications or consequences for those particular programs? We've budgeted the audit at about 2,584 hours. Again, that's because we'll be doing work not only at the CDCR, which it's my understanding Correction Standards Authority is a part of CDCR, but also the visits to the sample of counties that we've been asked to go out and visit. 2,500-hour audit takes us about 6-7 months.
Thank you, Ms. Howell. Is there any testimony from the affected agency?
My name
Agency is back there. Come forward, please.
Oh, okay.
If we can have one of you just stand up really quick just to make sure we get the agency.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Janine Smalley with the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, and with me is Kim Bouchard, who's with the Corrections Standard Authority. We just wanted to briefly explain the YOBG process that CSA has a role in. As Member Huber said, the legislation in 2007 that passed the YOBG funding also realigned a segment of the juvenile offender population from the state level to the local level. The YOBG program was established specifically to provide funding for counties to serve these offenders. In fiscal year 2009-10, the YOBG program had reached full implementation with a level of funding of $93.4 million, which was allocated to the counties. As required in statute for this program, the Corrections Standards Authority tracks county expenditures and outcomes and prepares a report to the legislature. Their first annual report was completed in March of 2011, and I do have copies for the committee.
Sergeants, pass that out. Thank you.
Because the program has only just reached full implementation, it appears the audit of the outcomes may be premature due to the early stages of the program. Also, the statute is broad as to how counties can utilize the funding, so it appears that any changes to that requirement would be legislatively and perhaps not through an audit. Ms. Bouchard has some additional information.
Thank you. Quickly, please.
Thank you. As Ms. Smalley indicated, I'm Kim Bouchard with the Correction Standards Authority, and I just wanted to add a little bit about CSA's role in implementing the YOBG legislation. After SBX 413 was enacted and created the reporting requirements for actual expenditures as well as performance outcomes, CSA convened a 16-member executive steering committee consisting of a variety of individuals throughout the state and representing a variety of disciplines. And the ESC worked with us to create the reporting processes and timeframes for this program. As part of that, we considered the outcomes that would be involved and what those would look like. And there's specific outcomes that are delineated in statute for YOBG. And we looked at those, and we looked at the other criteria for the YOBG program. And the way that it's laid out in statute is rather unworkable for this program. So we use the provision in the statute that provides flexibility for CSA to modify the outcome measures in the event that it's determined that counties are substantially unable to provide that information. The statute sets up YOBG similar to JJCPA in terms of the timing and general nature of reporting. There are two important differences between the two programs. JJCPA requires evidence-based programs, and JJCPA funding is limited strictly to programs. With YOBG, there's no EBP, there's no evidence-based program requirement, and the funding can be used not only for programs, but also for activities, for items, for strategies. And so that latter distinction is really important when you think about reporting on performance outcomes, like maybe a rearrest rate. to the extent that YOBG allows counties to fund things like the purchase of equipment that would allow them to make their facility more secure, the contracting for bed space with another county or with another facility, the delivery of training for staff. How would you talk about for a program or for an offender what the impact of that type of activity is on the outcome?
Great. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate the comments. Are there any comments from the public? In support, be very brief. We're about to start losing several members.
Morning, committee. My name is Dewey Willis, retired Youth Authority Superintendent. I worked also for 9 years for the Office of the Inspector General, and then 4 months for Governor Schwarzenegger under Governor Deukmejian, where we came up with a report called Reforming Corrections. At that time, we did talk about realignment for less serious offenders, and that has been done. Category 5, 6s, and 7s have been returned to the community. And of course, we still don't know what's happened with them. But now there's talk about taking the most serious, violent, chronic offenders that the courts under the Farrell decision say need specialized security, mental health services, substance abuse counseling, often sex offender treatment, and specialized education. We are concerned that those kinds of services are probably not being rendered, and I think it's also important to look at the fact that the Little Hoover Commission is recommending somewhat similar to what Elaine Howell is carefully delineated here. The Little Hoover Commission is saying...
I'm going to ask you to please wrap up.
Okay. Although the state is giving an increased portion of its juvenile justice budget to counties, it is not providing leadership or oversight to ensure the money is spent well or that outcomes are monitored or measured. That's all I have.
Thank you. Any other comments quickly?
Hello, my name is Pam Handel, and I am a special education teacher in DJJ in one of the Stockton facilities. And I am also here for SEIU, and we are in support of Ms. Huber's bill simply because, regardless of anything that was just said by the folks from the YOBG, with the state doing a similar program with the adults very soon, I think it would be very good for our elected officials to know how money has been spent and if it's been spent wisely, because you're about ready to go into a similar kind of situation and might be able to have some lessons learned. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Great.
I just have a couple of brief comments.
Very briefly, sir.
Okay. I retired as the facility superintendent for the NH Adjurgen facility, which served the California Youth Authority as the sort of the end of the line in a process of increasing sanctions for juvenile offenders. I'm an absolute proponent that the state must have a interim sanction for these kinds of kids that wind up in our system.
Thank you.
I don't think the counties can handle it quite
Thank you. Thank you. This request is moved by Mr. Alejo, second by Mr. Smythe. Secretary, can you please call the roll?
Laura?
Aye.
Laura, aye. Alejo? Alejo, aye. Donnelly? Donnelly, aye. Huber?
Aye.
Huber, aye. Monning? Monning, aye. Norby?
Aye.
Norby, aye. Smythe? Smythe, aye. Alquist? Anderson? DeLeon?
Aye.
DeLeon, aye. Dutton?
Aye.
Dutton, aye. LaMalfa? Rubio?
Aye.
Rubio, aye. Wolk? That's on call.
That request is on call. Thank you. We're going to move on to Ms. Maugh's item. That's tab E in your binder, item 121. Ms. Maugh, go ahead.
Thank you, members. I'll be brief. I'm pleased to...
It's been moved by Senator Rubio. Is there a second? Second by Mr.
Great.
Smythe.
I'll just have my witnesses present then. Oh, you don't need them?
No. Go ahead. Open.
You want me to open? Okay.
Briefly.
Basically, as chair of the Assembly Select Committee on Domestic Violence. I am working with the domestic violence advocates on where the money is going in our counties. It's not accountable. We don't know who's overseeing it, who's collecting it, and where they're sending the money. And we've just seen a decrease in domestic violence funding. We would love to have the counties audited, 4 counties audited.
Thank you, Ms. Ma. State Auditor, quickly.
Getting there. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, as Assemblymember Ma indicated, we would be looking at Domestic Violence Program Special Fund. She's asked us to sample 4 counties and collect and analyze certain information. First of all, the total amount of fee revenue that's been collected by the counties, determine whether that revenue collected from individuals, and this is collected from individuals.
Ms. Howell, let me stop you for a second. If we can have some quiet for a second, please. We're trying to listen to the testimony. Go ahead, Ms. Howell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Determine whether revenue from fees collected from individuals granted probation are separately tracked, so are they accounting for those fees? And just for your information, an individual granted probation for committing a domestic violence crime has to pay up to $400, it's my understanding. So are they tracking and accounting for those payments separately? Looking at the beginning and ending balances of the account and the fund, again, we've been asked, and I didn't mention this, to look at a 4-year window. So the revenue collected, the amounts collected from individuals, is that being tracked separately? Beginning and ending balances for the fund, the amount of those revenues that are actually transferred to domestic violence programs, identifying the recipients of that funding, if there are any that are not domestic violence programs, because the intent is to get this to these programs and to shelters. With respect to that, the number of individuals served by the shelters that have actually received funds from this domestic violence program, from the probation fee. And then the counties, when the counties collect the money, she's concerned about how long are the counties holding on to those funds before transferring that funding to the shelter so that they can provide services to victims. And then finally, at the county level, determine if the county's use of the funds is actually complying with statutory requirements, state law or regulation. In addition, we believe we need to go out to the courts and again, looking at a 4-year window, determine whether or not the counties are receiving all of the information from the courts relative to the fees that have been paid and collected by the courts. She's asked us to look at the frequency of complete payments, so how frequently are probationers actually paying what they are required to pay with regard to this particular fee, and then the extent to which there are mechanisms to enforce payment of the fee and how effective are those mechanisms. And then a couple of other objectives at the courts. Again, the extent to which the courts are completely and accurately remitting the fees that are being paid so that money gets to the county so it can ultimately get to the shelters so that they can use the funds to provide services. And similar to an objective we were going to do at the counties, how long are the courts holding on to these funds before transferring it to the county, and then ultimately the county transfers it to the shelter? So really looking at how long it's taking to get this money once it's been paid ultimately to the shelter that can use the funds to provide services. The budget is 2,220 hours. That's probably between 5 and 6 months to complete.
Thank you, Ms. Howell. It's a testimony from agencies.
Yes, my name is Kathleen Krennick. I'm Executive Director of Next Door Solutions to Domestic Violence. In Santa Clara County recently, within the past 10 months, we've learned that there was an account at the Department of Probation that amounted to $714,000 of these funds. It had been sitting there for years and no one knew it was there. In the meantime, our programs have been running deficits. We've been turning people away. We've been losing staff and services. And we lost 11 people to domestic violence homicides in the past 10 months. So it's a very serious topic for us. We have been working with the Department of Probation and the Board of Supervisors for 10 months to get the money over to the Office of Women's Policy so that it can be distributed to programs. The fund is now $756,000 because of interest that's been accruing in just this amount of time. When I looked at it, I found that there was no accountability, there was no reconciliation. The fees change hands multiple times, and yet there is no tracking of those fees or reconciliation. So we definitely support Assemblymember Ma's request. We think it's incredibly important at this moment in time.
Thank you.
Hi,
Next.
I'm Heather Minton.
Very briefly, please.
Sure, with the California Partnership to End Domestic Violence. We're the statewide coalition of domestic violence shelters and service providers. And we want to thank Assemblymember Ma for bringing this audit forward and just say that this is a statewide issue. We've put out a survey to our field, and we're finding that regardless of the county, regardless if it's LA County, Orange County, Mariposa County, and others, they're encountering the same difficulties, and the questions in this audit would address those difficulties. They've advocated on the local level, and it just hasn't been enough, and so we're asking the state to come in.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There is a motion on this request by Senator Rubio, second by Mr.
I just
Smythe.
want to, is San Francisco one of the counties? Or who are the 4 counties?
We haven't selected or identified the counties, but we certainly would be interested in any information that's out there to allow us to select. But there hasn't been any specific county identified.
Well, as long as San Francisco is one of them, I'll support it.
Well, thanks, Bob. Senator?
Is there any other questions from members of the committee? So, Secretary, please call the roll.
Laura? Laura, I. Alejo? Alejo, I. Donnelly? Donnelly, I. Huber? Huber, I. Monning? Monning, I. Norby? Norby, I. Smythe? Smythe, I. Alquist? Anderson? DeLeon? DeLeon, I. Dutton? Dutton, I. LaMalfa? Rubio? Rubio, I. That's on call.
That measure is on call. At this time, we're going to lift the calls to allow members who haven't voted to vote on the items discussed today. Secretary, please.
2011-118, Fuhr, Huber, Smythe, Fuhr, Smythe, DeLeon, DeLeon, I, Rubio.
Mr. Chair, I have some questions on this. Is it because it's we're lifting the call, we can't amend the motion or add to the motion? What's the committee's?
We cannot expand the scope of the audit.
I clearly understand that, but I don't know if we can change the motion that's on the table. Is there one? And if so, can we change it just because we're lifting the call?
I don't think so. We can. Yeah, the motion was to approve, and there was a second.
That was it?
And there was a vote taken as well.
Okay.
Rubio. Okay, and that's on call.
That item's still on call. Next item.
Okay, 2011-119, Hayashi. Donnelly. Donnelly, I. Norby. DeLeon. DeLeon, I. And Rubio.
I'm sorry.
The Hayashi request?
Hayashi.
119. Rubio, I.
Aye.
Okay, that's out.
That item is out.
2011-120, Portantino. Donnelly. Donnelly, I. DeLeon. DeLeon, I. Dutton.
Aye.
Dutton, I. Rubio.
Aye.
Rubio, I. That's out.
That item is out.
2011-121, Ma. Alquist. Anderson. LaMalfa. Wolk. That's on call. Yeah.
Is that a call?
Yes.
That item is still on call.
2011-122, Halderman and Senator LaMalfa. Donnelly. Donnelly, I. Huber.
Aye.
Huber, I. Norby. Norby, I. Smythe. Smythe, I. DeLeon. Dutton. Dutton, I. Rubio. And that's on call.
That item is still on call. Next item.
2011-123, Donnelly. Donnelly, I. Smythe. Smythe, I. DeLeon. DeLeon, I. Rubio. Rubio, I. That's out.
That item is out.
2011-124, Norby. Donnelly. Donnelly, I. Smythe. Smythe, I. DeLeon. Dutton. Dutton, I. Rubio. And that's on call. Norby, I have you.
That item fails.
Okay. Oh, sorry.
Next item.
Sorry. 2011-124, Norby. Huber. Huber, I.
That item still fails. Still on call?
Yeah. We need a senator.
Okay, sorry. The item's still on call. Sorry. Next item.
2011-126, Senator Corbett. Donnelly? No. Donnelly, no. Huber?
No.
Huber, no. Norby?
No.
Norby, no. Smythe? No. Smythe, no. DeLeon?
Aye.
DeLeon, aye. Dutton?
No.
Dutton, no. Rubio?
Corbett.
Corbett?
Aye.
Rubio, aye. That's on call.
That item is on call.
J, 2011-127, Senator DeSaulnier. Donnelly? Donnelly, aye. Norby? No. Norby, no. Smythe? No. Smythe, no. DeLeon?
Aye.
DeLeon, aye. Dutton? And Rubio?
Aye.
Rubio, aye. That's out.
That item is out. We're going to keep the roll open for 10 more minutes to allow members who haven't voted to come to the committee and vote.
Keep going. 2011-129, Huber, Alquist, LaMalfa, Wolk, and then 2000, and that's
Wait.
still on call.
And that's the few?
That's Huber.
Oh, on Huber, okay.
And then Knight. 2001-130, Knight, Donnelly. Aye. Donnelly, aye. Norby. Aye. Norby, aye. DeLeon. Dutton. Aye. Dutton, aye. And Rubio. Here, so it's on call.
So, item 130 fails, and we're keeping the roll open for 10 more minutes to have members add on.